Nimrod. Rising from destruction. Well, there you go. Nimrod rising from destruction, Palmyra Arch. It's in plain sight really, isn't it? What it's all about. London and New York Arch, Palmyra. I gave a phone call to the Institute for Digital Archaeology and they assured me that this arch is nothing to do with Baal, that they actually changed those plans because of the backlash of the public. So instead that they were going to now be building the Ark of Triumph, which is actually a Roman human achievement and nothing to do with pagan deities or Mesopotamia. But listen to this news report.
This is how Palmyra looked as ISIL took control the Triumphal Arch before the group destroyed it. Today, the 2,000-year-old arch from the Temple of Baal looks like this. And year-old arch from the Temple of Baal looks like this.
You got the Temple of Baal.
So the news are just blatantly coming out with it. From the Temple of Baal.
How there's this connection between Nimrod and then Baal, and then from there to pagan religions throughout the world, and many believe that Nimrod is eventually going to be connected in some way to the coming Antichrist. So my concern was, we're putting up these giant arches. Well, what's an arch? It's an entrance. It's a gateway. It's a portal. So I was like, are we putting up giant welcome mats basically for the Antichrist by putting these giant arches, reproductions that stood in front of the Temple of Baal, putting them up in New York City? It was supposed to go in Times Square and Trafalgar Square in London, basically two of the most important locations in the Western world, basically kind of putting up a welcome sign for the Antichrist. That just seemed like a real bad idea to me.
It's very, very sinister. The Triumphal Arch of Palmyra is only about 50 yards away from the Temple of Baal. It has been floodlit, bright red. Today is the Feast of Moloch, the first day of the blood sacrifice to the beast.
This date around the time of Passover on April the 22nd, and then to illuminate it blood red in Trafalgar Square for 3 days and 3 nights. As well as, may I add, right in the position in Trafalgar Square where they had a massive performance at Easter. They had the crucifixion played out right in the position in Trafalgar Square where now, as Pastor D is showing, that they've built this archway for 3 days and 3 nights that's been illuminated blood red around the time of Passover.
Today, the 2,000-year-old arch from the Temple of Baal.
Nimrod. Rising from destruction.
There is a passageway to the most evil place you can imagine. A gate behind which the demons wait.
Just crazy, really, when, I'm told on the phone that it's purely a Roman triumphal arch and nothing to do with Baal. But when you go to Rome, you go into the Colosseum and there's an exhibition saying Rising from Destruction, Palmyra, Nimrod.
We have to consider what an arch does. An arch really divides the inside of a city or the outside of a city. If you think of a room, it divides one room from another room, right?
It's a doorway.
It's a doorway. It's a gateway, right? It's a gateway. It divides and joins together. Spiritually speaking, to them, it meant also, because we didn't go into this, and I doubt we'll have time tonight either, but it also divided the heavens and the earth. Spiritually, the heavens, the spiritual realm from the earthly realm, which is the same thing that the temple did, right? It joined the heaven and the earth, right? In the Holy of Holies, that's where God's presence dwelled. The heavenly realm and the earthly realm were one place. That's where man could meet with God. It's also was divided off and separated by the holies of holies. Man could not go into his presence just on a whim. So where an arch does this in visual form, the temple literally did. It holds that same function. Let's think of it of another way. Let's picture a house, right? And you find a big arch separating two rooms in a house. You could literally, if the arch was big enough, you could go into a house, stand in the midst of the arch, and not be in any of the rooms. You could be in a house and not occupy the rooms. Or transversely, if you stood on the arch, you could occupy both rooms at the same time, right? These are all concepts that we're very familiar with, right? To be in the world but not of the world, right? We talk about that all the time, and when you come to the books of John, right? So it's a spiritual significance. This arch and image does what the temple did in actuality. It's a display. So in every way, and I go through there and document these, in every way it stands in antithesis and represents the bondage of Egypt. It represents the antithesis of Jerusalem. So it's an antithesis to all of this. But it wasn't the only arch built, and that's where we'll go next.
Okay, bringing it up to modern times, what do you see as the significance of the plans to erect the Arches of Baal? Supposedly they weren't going to do it, and then they changed their mind and decided they were going to do it, but they didn't do the Arch of Baal. They did didn't they do a replica of Titus?
Exactly. I had to rewrite this chapter. I actually addressed that in the book. I had to rewrite that chapter 3 times because I hadn't finished with the book and all that information.
It was happening real time.
Real time. I had already been 2 years into research and writing, and this thing popped up. I about fell out of my chair when I read that.
You did.
I'm like, what? So here's what happened there. So Palmyra is where the Arch of Baal occupied. Most of it was destroyed, but they couldn't destroy that Arch of Baal. It was left standing. But the Arch of Baal actually stood at the entrance to the temple that was there, to the Temple of Baal. There was another arch that exists at the end. Think about this. Picture this image. I don't have it to pull up right away. But the Arch of Severus, which is actually the one that was made in replica, which is the same model that the Arch of Titus is built on, existed at the end of a colonnade that you walk through. So you had all these huge pillars, a column of columns that were a path. You had to walk down this path, pass through the Arch of Severus, go out through a space, pass under the Arch of Baal to enter the temple. Now, if you consider what I'm saying and what you've just said about the Yahuwah Triangle, visually what that means, of passing through the Arch of Egypt to go into under the Arch of Baal. I mean,
You can't write this stuff.
I honestly do believe, as scientists and archaeologists, their primary interest is in recreating things that have been destroyed because of the history of it and the archaeology, the architecture, and obviously they don't have an understanding of the biblical meaning and spiritual meaning of this, and also the times that we live in. So as for the scientists, I tend to believe that those from the Institute of Digital Archaeology do not realise that perhaps they are being used in a greater scheme of things. But at the end of the day, we know that our battle is not against flesh and blood. But I have to say, this is all very strange. And this is the great trick, you know, this is very well could be how it all plays out, especially to begin with. You know, that Christians are seen as weak, that those who humble themselves are seen as weak, those that aren't going to join that agenda, they're seen as weak because the New Age is going to want to get rid of them. There's even quotations about that somehow we're holding it all back. And so the ones that don't follow the pride of this will be seen as the weak ones that need to be hunted. So hunt or be hunted. Join with the beast or be hunted.
You think? I mean, it was right on the nose too. I mean, just the fact that they had planned it is very telling. And I've often said it before. I'm like, why does the whole world worship the beast? Because they already are and have been for thousands of years.
Here's the other thing. Okay, so the Russians liberated this from ISIS, right? So because of that liberation, they changed their plans. No longer are they going to build the Arch of Baal. They're going to build the Arch of Severus, which is based on the same model. They were going to replicate it and build it everywhere. Well, then they said, no, we're going to take it to everywhere eventually, but we're not going to do it everywhere just at once. We're going to do it in New York and Trafalgar Square,
Right.
in London. So first they put it up and they set it up in Trafalgar Square. Then they take it down, they ship it over, and they place it. It went up. Actually, it was erected this past at the end of fall here, beginning of fall. They erected it in New York. Here's the thing. That marble that they used to make that thing is it's called Egyptian marble.
Egyptian marble.
It was taken from the same marble where Da Vinci used to make his sculpture David. Egyptian marble used to make the Arch of Severus. Going through that. So I mean, I go through and list all this and talk about that and document that as well in the book. It's there. So, but we're moving on. So this arch was not the only one built. There was another one that was built after a successive kingdom, and I go into that. And that was built. This one may be more familiar to readers. Is the Arc de Triomphe. It's in France, right? It was built by Napoleon. But guess when its construction began? It began after his first victory in battle in his crusade to begin to take over all the lands. Do you know where he went first? Alexandria, Egypt. And then he tried to go up into Israel and Syria. Before he started conquering. Now think about this. If you're in France, you're got this idea that you're going to expand the kingdom of France and the rule of France. You know, you're thinking go up into Britain, go over into Europe, Eastern Europe, go down into Spain, right? No. His first campaign, Alexandria, Egypt. He conquers Egypt. He conquers some of the land of Israel, even though he didn't hold it very long. He conquers the same lands that Rome did. He then begins to build the Arc de Triomphe. And I'll share that right here real quick with our readers here. We'll get that up here. There's the Arc de Triomphe right there. And it'll tell you in the description. We won't have a lot of time to go in it, but you can see it. It's
obviously very similar.
Obviously very similar. You'll look at it. They'll tell you it was based upon what arch? The Arch of Titus.
So, how does this apply with CERN? So the research I've come across has led me to really see that anyone who looks into CERN knows that they're trying to open up some sort of portal. And they have. They've actually been successful to one degree or another. I mean, here's some images that clearly show something strange happening. Now, if you do any research, you find out that the same day this was happening, CERN was messing around on that very moment of that day. So it's no coincidence that if you know the belief of the flat earth and the closed cosmology, then why else would they be doing this? This is why they need these gates, these portals, these arches, because just like you heard, gates are just that. I mean, look at Stargate. Everyone remembers that movie. They also made a whole TV show about it. It's right in our face. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. The funny thing is that I watch a show with my son called The Flash. I'm sure most of you guys have heard it. And they have a particle accelerator. If you don't know what CERN looks like and what it does, take a look at this. This is like verbatim on what CERN does. Now the Flash has what, super speed, and what do they try to do constantly? They're trying to collide these two particles in order to create a singularity, to create black holes, to create this God particle in order to find, again, they are opening portals, they are opening dimensions, they are looking for, to me, they are the bottomless, they're trying to get the keys to the bottomless pit, and that's what, in my opinion, CERN seems to be. It's holding to these things. It's funny that, again, I've said this before, but with television shows and movies like this, they put it right in our face, but you just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear in order to make these kind of connections. It's laughable at this moment. Every time I turn around, I discover more stuff that's right in front of our face. This whole show, Flash, and the fact that they're constantly talking about exactly the same things as CERN does is amazing. But wow, it's put in an entertainment fashion. So that's how I tie this in together with Flat Earth. Because if you are in an enclosed system, how else are you supposed to get out? NASA can't get out. It's a joke what they try to pull. They tell you they find all these new planets, and I mean, if you just look a little close, you'll see the lies that they're constantly doing. It's ridiculous already. We need to wake up, understand that we live in an enclosed system, and this is why places like CERN, HARP, and all these other entities that are constantly looking ways to make communication with the other side. How do you think the technology has come across? How do you think we've gotten all this newfound understanding? I mean, it's unbelievable. Guys, hopefully this kind of helped you in any way. Hopefully this video made some sense to you. If it did, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. Share it with your friends, those who are looking for this kind of information. Like I always say, I will see you around.